Okay, and we are live. It's really my pleasure to be here and to welcome all of you to this next installment of the NAF Research and Tech Talk series. It's our second talk of 2022. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick Minar. I'm the Director of Research and Reporting here at NAF. Before we bring out our guest, Leslie Beller, I just wanted to do some quick housekeeping and have some announcements before we get going. As always, we're going to be posting the recording of this talk to our Research and Tech LinkedIn channel and also to our NAF YouTube channel. So in case you miss anything or you want to hear something again or you have to leave early, the recording will be up after the fact, so don't worry about taking notes if you don't want to. Everything will be there. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to give us a follow on our NAF Educator Facebook page, as well as our NAF Research and Tech LinkedIn page. And be sure to check out the full playlist of Research and Tech Talks. I'm going to be linking links to all of those in the chat now, in case you want to see those. Furthermore, if you're just joining us in the chat, I'm trying to hit the admit button as quick as I can. We're having a good response so far. But feel free to say hi. Tell us who you are, where you're joining us from today, what organization you might be with or school district. We like to make a small learning community throughout these talks, so don't be shy. Introduce yourself. If you've never attended one of these Research and Tech Talks in the past, that's quite all right. Our goal is to bring cutting-edge research and best practices to all of the educators out there, to our NAF staff, so that you can use these best practices or anything you hear here in these talks just to improve your practice and to improve what you're doing with students. And as such, we want this to be interactive. We want it to be dynamic. So feel free, if a question or a thought or a comment is bubbling up as Leslie and I are talking, drop it in the chat. And we're going to do our best to try to answer any of those questions or address those comments kind of as we're going on a rolling basis. Or alternatively, if you would prefer to hold your question till the end, we will have some dedicated time at the end, about 10-15 minutes for Q&A. So however you want to engage us is totally fine. I'm keeping everyone in the audience with their camera off and on mute just so Leslie and I can chat, but I will also open that up at the end of the talk during the Q&A if you want to come off camera and off mute just to say your question or provide your thoughts. Okay, with that out of the way, let me introduce our guest. Leslie Beller is the CEO and founder of MHA Labs. That's a community-based research and development lab designing tools, assessments, trainings, and institutional strategies that help folks like educators, after-school instructors, workforce developers, and employers make a shift towards a skills-driven culture. We're going to get into what that means exactly very heavily today throughout our talk. Prior to launching MHA Labs, Leslie was the program director for youth initiatives at the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, that's formerly known as the Chicago Workforce Investment Council. When she was there, Leslie championed citywide college and career readiness initiatives. And Leslie's also spent a few years working on diversity and equity issues at the University of Virginia. Prior to being a co-founder at MHA Labs, she was also the co-founder and former president of IC STARS. That's a technology leadership development program that uses simulation-based education to address over 300 technical, business, and leadership standards necessary to succeed in today's rapidly shifting economic environment. Before her work there, Leslie served as the Director of Jobs for Youth, which is a large-scale youth workforce development agency specifically targeting disconnected young adults. And she was responsible there for things like intake screening, assessment, and well-staffing skills in the development program. Now, Leslie has been super generous with her time before even showing up today, where she actually constructed a great slide deck containing all the info we are going to be talking about today and much, much more. Things like resources, expanded explanations, and examples just to go along with what we're talking about. I'm going to upload that now, or Leslie can re-upload it, but that will be there the whole time and then also uploaded to our video after the fact. So With a wealth of expertise and insight on pretty much all things career readiness, I'm really happy to have the chance to sit down with Leslie today and have a chat around kind of a skills-based learning framework to learning environments and work-based learning. So Leslie, why don't you come on screen and make sure you're off mute. Let me make sure you're spotlighted here.
So you can hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you. Yes.
Awesome.
How's everything going today?
It's going well. I was listening to my bio and I was like, oh, I sound a lot more kind of like boring and wonky than I think I probably am in real life. So if you were listening to that and thinking I was going to be some kind of boring kind of city worker, you'll be happy to know that is not my style. So I'm super excited to be here today.
I think anyone who maybe got that impression is going to be immediately dismiss it like a minute into our talk here. Before we get started, is there anything you want to say to our audience, just generally, or our future audience that may be kind of tuning in just before I start throwing some questions your way?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think you highlighted it by the resources. So one of the, I know it's always a lot harder to kind of just like sit back and listen and absorb information when you're kind of worried about the resources, right? Or if you get excited about something, you're taking notes. So one of our core strategies always is to provide every single thing that we have into a custom resource for you. So in the chat, you'll see there is a Google Drive where I have put all of our resources. And it's tailored for you, so you can add things to that. You can start growing that in your community. MHA is also, as an organization, for those of you who don't know us, we are 100% free, open access, open resource organization. So our website has all of our free tools. So it was really important to me to have all of you know that all of our work is accessible. And then before we kind of jump in, I wanted to highlight a little bit, and we'll get a little bit more into this, but MHA is an organization, from our resources and our tools and our methodologies are all very neutral. What that means is that each organization or each person will tend to bring their own ideology to that work, their own philosophy, right? We're not robots. So I just want you to know today, as you're listening, what you're really going to be hearing is, because it is a fireside chat, is you're going to hear through the lens of probably my own ideology about the work, my own philosophy about youth development, my own philosophy about anti-racism. But just if you're working in a district that may not be that expressive and open, I just want you to know the tools will work just like if you downloaded any kind of lesson plan tool. The framework is really neutral. It can be adopted by anybody. So I want you to be free just to kind of, as you're listening today, just to listen that this is my perspective on leading MHA. But NAF is going to have their own perspective, and I love what they've done with kind of aspirations and connections, and they'll be implementing the work in a constructive way. So I just want you to feel like we are really free. And you are actually free to take everything you learned today and implement it in any way that you want to. That is what people love the most about our service as an organization. You know, we're not like the strict kind of protocol coming out of the University of Chicago. We really are kind of a family and a community. So I just think this is really important for you all to kind of know that you are listening it through my lens today.
That's a great context, and please apply that to the chat as well. Feel free to share your experiences, your own perspectives, because that's the kind of thing we want to hear and try to address as best we can. So yeah, I'm really excited, as I mentioned, to sit down with Leslie here. So maybe before we actually start, Leslie, you can set the stage for us a little bit just by telling our audience a little more about MHA Labs and kind of what your vision, what your mission is for that organization when it comes to working with young people. Absolutely. And I think we can kind of highlight just kind of two sides to our work. I tried to highlight a little bit when we started, but I can get a little more specific. So MHA was actually founded about 10 years ago, and it's our 10-year anniversary. And we were actually founded in our mayoral office. So we were working on kind of a big college and career readiness initiative. Like, what does it mean to be college and career ready as a whole city? But the benefit is that my background is in community organizing. So, but when you're a community organizer and you have access to every single person in the entire city of Chicago, it gave us a chance to do this enormous kind of crowdsourcing. So the entire Chicago public school system, our entire Department of Health and Human Services, all of our after school network, that MHA really came together as a community to say, what kind of stand do we want to make for young people in this role? Now, if many of you are teachers, you know that just like legislating skills.
is not working. I mean, like legislative Common Core, like these things don't work. They have to be beloved and kind of adopted. So we really set out and saying, what is a common vision that we could all believe in? And this is the vision of our organization, which you are welcome to run with, is that at a fundamental level, we felt every single young person from every community and every family and every city and every country around the world would benefit from truly knowing in their heart and mind how skilled they are. Now, I don't know if I'm almost 50. I've been teaching MHA for 10 years, and I still am panicked about, am I good enough at this? Am I an imposter syndrome? You know, Nick knows I've been emailing him all week. But we know that when you grow up and you truly have confidence in what you know, so we call that kind of belief in yourself, self-esteem. But to grow up in a world where you actually truly believe that you are a skilled person, you know how skilled you are, we started thinking about how all the choices you might make in your life could be different. So it's not just about schooling, right? So we learn kind of competencies there, but this idea is that what choices would I make in my own community? What choices would I make in my educational pathways if I truly felt confident? So for us, our kind of core kind of reason for being in competence-based education is to actually build the awareness and confidence that would allow young people to pursue the dreams and aspirations they want for this world, and then what that could look like. So that was just really, really important for us. So grounded in that is everything kind of stems from that. And then I'm going to highlight our mission because I think for a lot of you working in organizations, I try not to talk like theoretical. So I'm going to highlight these because these are probably conversations that you're having. So our kind of 4 kind of mission areas are all things that you could be adopting, and maybe you come at it from different angles. So I thought it would be kind of helpful as kind of we lay the groundwork, and then we'll start riffing. So first on a mission standpoint is this kind of concept of a skills identity, right? So when we talk about work readiness is your skills as a human being applied to work. It is not a thing that exists outside of that. So if I'm a really good communicator and I'm with my friends and all of that, I might apply my communication skills to work. That's why it's called human capital. So for us, skills really is just a universal concept for like the things I know how to do well, the things I can use to make a change in my life and the world and apply. So it's very kind of open. And then we want to call it an identity because it's really special. Like we always try to make everything kind of neutral, but this idea is that like, I'm really good at this. Here's what I really believe in. These are the things that I take away. And what's beautiful about that is that means every young person in your class or in your program can feel special and skilled in their own unique way. And so Nick has a set of skills that I really appreciate. He sent me probably the single best prep sheet I've ever seen, right? Really. But that skill is not something that I'm good at. So together our skills were able to match to make it a great opportunity for you today. But this idea is that like skills really feel like our identity. They're personal. So when we go to teach a competency-based and skill-based work, we make it more abstract and less personal. It actually diminishes, I think, its power. The second is the idea about language. So MHA actually offers, and we've created our own kind of 21st century skills framework. We worked with 125 different people, including 75 parents, 50% were non-English speaking, teachers, counselors, employers, to say, could we come up with common language that we could basically fireside around, right? So it's really about a skills community. So if I learn how to do something really well and you do, then I can share that. So this idea about standards in the past and language really sucks and was like really miserable for a teacher. But we're like, how could we animate this? Could this be like a great way? But we also want to ensure that a lot of language around, especially 21st century skills, to be honest, is very culturally laden. It's very discriminatory. So like being articulate is kind of code for upper middle class white English, where being skilled at adjusting your communication style is the actual course. So it's really important for us to kind of deculturize like grit and zest and all of those things. So we've taken a lot of that work from you. Nobody likes to sit around and like write competency statements. So we created that work for you. And I think NAF is actually adopting some of that. So that's a win for you. And then we're like, okay, everyone's like, oh, great, we have a framework and it's all really visionary. And we're like, how do you do it? And to be honest, I was only originally hired to write a framework and I was like, oh, I guess I really didn't think it through. So for the last 10 years, we have worked with literally thousands and thousands of teachers and instructors to come up with a really simple method. And actually, most of our interview questions today are going to be centered around unpacking that. It's called Reframe. Super easy. So for those of you who've been scared about doing competency-based education, and when I go read the books, I understand why you're scared. I'm like, why do they make this so complicated? We've tried to make it a little less complicated.
Yep.
And then last but not least, in our kind of mission is, so we're talking a little bit before we got on the call watching the Supreme Court nomination today. and just kind of being a little bit overwhelmed by what's going on. And so we know that you could be the single most extraordinary person, but because of where you come from, whether you're Black or brown or a woman or LGBT or whatnot, it's that you are facing discrimination at work. So in the hiring process, through inclusion and whatnot. And so we've dedicated a large part, and most of the work that I have done through my career, the lens that with which, when you were hearing kind of my bio, each one of those jobs was actually specifically done and hired through the lens of anti-discrimination work. So we heard the skills gap. What we hear is you have an inadequate process to recognize the skills and talents of actually young people and people of color. So we take it upon ourselves, and actually recently have said we are no longer working with organizations who don't put anti-racist work with employers as part of their core work. Because it is unfair to a young person to apply for a job that's brilliant and think they lost that job because of skills and not because of who they are. So that's our kind of vision and our mission. So every young person, amazing everywhere, and that we really do it through those kind of 4 pillars. And then we just made super cute, super practical tools to help you accomplish those goals. So it's not like, here's this great theory, and you're like, great, that's useless. I was a practitioner for most of my career. So that's kind of our background and story in a nutshell, but I hope it just helps you understand kind of feeling like there's more to this work than just like grading a competency on kind of an assessment and sending a kid off to a job.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you're inspired, I guess is my point.
Absolutely. Thank you for that tee up. And I think our audience will agree as we kind of move through the work, they'll see it's a really person-centered approach, right? It's based around creating the best person or the best version of yourself or a young student as possible. And we're going to dive right into that. Thank you for kind of teeing us up there with your mission, with your vision, and just your passion for fighting those biases and being anti-racism and anti-bias. So maybe since many NAF partners and, most of our educators, some of our educators are beginning to kind of make a shift into this competency-based learning, can you share how MHA defines competency-based learning and what are some of those kind of key shifts that are necessary to taking that approach?
Absolutely. So we were kind of laughing on the thing about this kind of transition to competency, and I'm kind of like, what were we doing before, right? And so when you think about it, doing anything in life, whether it's work, when you get up in the morning, when you're going to school, you're making breakfast, you're actually learning about, all of these things that we do, anything that you do well is because you have a competency. And everything that you don't do well is because you haven't built that competency yet. So in terms of when you think about outside of school and the whole rest of the world, it's all about applying what you know how to do to achieve an outcome. And so we felt like for us, competency-based education was made really complicated and scary. And our approach was just like, you need to have a skill to do something. So if we said, our underlying kind of focus is how do we help any parent, any teacher, any after-school worker, or any employer just take what they have. So for us, competency-based education is not about shifting your entire curricular methodology. It is not about adopting an entirely new thing. It's saying, in my English class, this is what we are currently doing. How do I make the skills people are learning transparent, upfront, and that's what our whole reframe process is. How do I just give feedback on that competency as we're building it? And then how do I let you know at the end how you're doing on this competency? So we are not about, that's why it's called reframe. We are not about changing, but we're saying your program is already competency-based. What you are missing is the competency-based transparency that sits over that. And so literally, if you were sitting in a class for 45 minutes doing a worksheet, which would be considered like the lowest form of education, it takes almost 15 different skills to accomplish that. Right? But a kid would never think that that's what they're doing. Sitting through detention and not getting in trouble again in detention actually requires an enormous skill set. So this idea is that they are transparent everywhere. So for us, everything is already competency-based education. And what we realized is that we could help people just close that gap. I know that isn't as specific, but when you really frame it that way, I'm hoping to take kind of the pressure off of what that means. So for us, it is about identifying what you're doing, making it transparent, giving feedback on it, and encouraging people to utilize that skill and competency, but not about redoing everything. Does that help?
Yeah.
Any additional questions for that you think I maybe aren't clear about kind of? Does that resonate
No, I
with
think,
everybody?
yeah, let us know in the chat. I think that what you mentioned is really important. It's not a curriculum to replace what's already happening in schools, right? It's a mindset shift
Yeah,
almost. Yeah, to make the skills that students are trying to master, trying to learn more transparent so that they can actually be a more active participant in working towards them. Does that make sense as well? Like, would you say that's accurate?
absolutely.
Okay.
I want to add too, I think because everyone here, because now it's in the context of kind of work-based learning. I also think too, work-based learning is considered something really foreign.
Mm.
So I think like everything you do, I mean, basically human capital is taking your skills and assets and knowledge and applying it to work, which means that every single thing that you learn growing up is work-based learning. So you might actually have a class that contextualizes that in like a manufacturing class, but I want you all to feel confident no matter what you are teaching, you are doing work-based learning. When you actually run a great classroom culture and young people are kind of engaging when they're supposed to and staying quiet when they're supposed to and raising their hands and offering ideas and doing their homework, that is literally what you do at work, right? I mean, that would be like the dream of every employer. You've just never framed it that way. So your current classes are already work-based learning, but once again, if you just adopt competencies, then you automatically become a work readiness program. But everybody wants to cram it into like an after-school workshop. But if you do 18 years of a continuous, amazing project-based learning, supported learning, classroom management, you are creating work-ready young people. So like, I don't want you to think that's also something different.
Gotcha. So don't keep it a secret. We don't want it to be a secret that your students are becoming college and career ready. We want them to know they're gaining those skills.
Yeah, and it's not just like a special class.
Right.
It's literally,
right.
So if you adopt competency-based language, you are immediately a work readiness program. You are immediately a college readiness program. If you go to a school, your school can now apply for college and career readiness money as long as you just literally adopt a competency model.
Gotcha. Let's dive in a little bit to that reframe approach you were talking about. So thanks for kind of teeing that up. But let's break that down. Let's break that down in a little more detail for our audience. And some of the materials I've read. Oh, thanks very much for putting that in there. You're already ahead of me. You mentioned the first step, as you just put in the chat, is really to any skills or competency-based approaches that reveal your targeted skills. And what I've read is to explicitly state to the students, to whoever is within the learning environment, that you want them to know explicitly what skills they're working for. Why is this such a critical first step, and why, in your opinion, is it kind of absent from a lot of educational programs?
Yeah, so here's the thing is that I actually think it's ironic. It's not necessarily absent, but where it is, and many of you, I mean, I will say many of you may have already progressed to this, so I don't want to speak negatively because I actually don't know your work. So many of you have done switch to project-based learning or other areas. But I remember I spent a lot of time when I think Common Core got adopted. And what you'll do is that you'll take your lesson plan, it's like fantastic, it's got essential question, it's got all of this great stuff. And then at the bottom, you'll have a little section that here are the skills that are aligned to my lesson plan. So you probably someone threw a framework at you and you're like, okay, I'm going to chop through and I'm going to put them at the bottom. Right. So I don't know. I think there's a little button on here where you can raise hands. So if that's what you do, you can say in the chat. So literally, when we say targeted skills, all we are really asking you to do is to take that section that's typically at the end and make that the fundamental goal of your lesson plan. So many of you, when you look at your goals of your lesson plan, you will actually probably be surprised that it is probably a competency. You just never called it that. So when Brooke said earlier, the word competency can be scary. If you write a goal that all of my young people will be able to do close reading and identify the theme of a paragraph, that is actually a skill. And that is a skill you use to actually without your job, without your career, without other areas. So I think a lot of this is not necessarily it's new, it's that it's putting it as the center. Because when it's something that you just assume and imply, which is kind of what reframe is, and we'll go through those steps. When skills are implied, they are likely never known to the young person. So we actually worked with one of the best after-school networks in the entire country. And they had a research team that came in and interviewed all the kids and say, please tell me something you got learned from the program. And not one kid could actually explain anything they learned. So when you look at your young people and you're thinking they're doing all this amazing work and they're so skilled and you're going to the the teacher lounge and you're like, oh my God, this young person's amazing. They get a report card that says an A on it. That's it. They have literally no idea what skills they got out of your class. So the thing is that you were actually doing competency-based education, but it's a little bit like the tree falls in the wood. Can anyone hear whatever that analogy is?
Right.
Is that we actually just found that you have that transparency, that focus, but it's a little bit becomes like a North Star for a young person. So when your kids are distracted, they're not focused. When you say, we're going to go jump into this unit, and when you finish this unit, you're going to be amazing at the following 3 skills. And those 3 skills are going to be able to help you do this in college and this in your life, and this is going to come out. We did a whole thing on debate class, being able to also defend, your LGBT status, all of these other factors, right? So this idea about is just putting skills at the center. Also, what we found, though, is that made it more equitable, right? So if I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, this is the skill I'm adopting, then I make sure that I focus my attention, I'm focusing my homework, I'm focusing everything on that. Without that transparency, you are likely getting like 30 different outcomes in your class. So just like at work, I mean, how many of you would love it if your boss was like, hey, this week you're going to be able to get a bonus on Friday because if you do this skill well? I mean, it's fantastic. Like, we're all struggling. We don't know what we're supposed to be doing. But idea is that by centering on that, it also makes it nice and it's objective. So you as an instructor, which you can't help this, right? We're all tend to be biased. Like, I love I like all the sassy kids who are sarcastic and really smart ass, right? Like those are, and I know I'm going to privilege them. But by having a skill that's very transparent language, it always reminds me to say, my job is to hold my young people accountable to that,
Right.
Not to my own bias, not to my own personal, not to something else. So for us, and it's also just makes it really clear. So when your kids are like, why do I need to know this? Which we hear all the time. That skill gives them that reason. And then the rest of the time is just spent unpacking that skill, applying that skill, talking about that skill. So competency-based education really is taking what you have, transparent it, and then adding a couple additional practices that we're going to go over. So it really is just about, I cannot underestimate and tell you like the importance of making that transparent.
Right. And really quickly, what's been your experience when that is made transparent to students? Do they appreciate it? Are they confused? Like, what's been kind of your personal experience there when those competencies are highlighted for them, like before the learning takes place?
What I found is that I think that it makes it, they definitely see the core value in what they're doing. So you're constantly referencing it back. When you add the practices on it, it gives validity to why you're actually doing it, right? And so I think the sense of like young people begin to understand, oh, you're actually teaching me something that is useful to me in my life. And I think there isn't this surprise and aha. So a lot of times we reveal kind of the learning after the fact. Like, I'm gonna teach you this thing, and then I'm gonna, like, at the end is gonna be a nice surprise. That we found that young people really live in a sense of, like, we talk about low self-esteem and panic. Like, I don't know what is expected of me. And so if you're going through a whole class and you have no idea what is expected of you, you have no idea what it means to be good. Let's talk about kind of society at large. When you have no idea what it means to be good in someone's eyes, and this person is judging you, that transparency of knowing that if I do that, I am going to win. If I do that, my teacher is going to respect me and support me, and I know I'm working. If I do well at this, then I have a skill that I can use for life. And especially when you don't just, they're living, I've walked into classrooms where people are like, they literally have their skill framework on their desk. They have the evidence that are supposed to be looking at it, and they're self-calibrating against that. And so I think that as a teacher, it'd be incredible to have your kids self-calibrate. But I think that is this whole idea, like this mystery of schooling, right? And so I think that demystification is what we hear from young people. And they love it because they're like, oh my God, I know what I'm good at. Back to that initial thing. Like, I did that.
Gaining
like,
confidence.
I'm actually good at that now. And I don't think grades just don't give you that high. You're like, what's a B? It doesn't like have any value to it.
Right. That makes total sense. Kind of just putting it out there up front so that the students recognize what that North Star, what that guiding star is.
Yeah. It also lets you, to be honest, it lets you to be a lot more creative about what you're teaching too. Because if you don't have to be so literal in what you're teaching, you can pick like a crazy activity, because if they know that's the skill underneath it, you can be actually a lot more creative in the activities that you design for your class.
Sure.
When they are competency-based too. So as I always say, like, if you can, our kind of theory is that if you can justify it with a skill, then you're allowed to do it. I actually had a group of parents that said their parenting strategy was, if I as the parent can justify what I'm doing with our kid because it'll build a skill, then I'm allowed to do it. And it was like it solved a lot of their parenting fights. So it was kind of funny.
I love that approach because it makes it Like you said, if it puts the North Star out there, you have flexibility in how, depending on the student, depending on the situation, you're going to get them there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I actually really like that.
Yeah. And if you have a principal
But
who's like super up your, and over, I was going to say something inappropriate, but super's always kind of always haunting you in your class, for you to be able to say, hey, I want to do this really creative project because it's legitimately going to build these skills. It actually gives you the evidence for you, to be honest, to defend the choices you make in your classroom. And when you're many teachers have to defend their curriculum with their principals. When you can talk about it through the competency lens, then your actual principal can also translate and understand the activities you are doing. So even in your own teacher performance review, it can really be an asset for you to be transparent about what you're teaching.
Gotcha. That actually kind of touches on step 3 of Reframe, kind of focusing on that activity. But can you speak for a second on just establishing some of that evidence?
Yeah.
Like, I think about evidence all the time being in the research department, but educators who don't have a research background or aren't maybe used to collecting data may not think about it that way. So what's kind of your experience for demystifying that aspect of it, kind of gathering that evidence?
Absolutely. So evidence is another thing, not to blame you personally, because I don't know you as well. Evidence is another thing that the research community has totally ruined. Like evidence-based theology,
Sorry about that.
randomized control study and all of this stuff. So literally when we talk about evidence kind of in the stages, right? So let's say I'm revealing this targeted skill, I'm in a debate class, and I'm going to use adjusting communication to meet the needs of an audience, right? Because there's a specific style to debate. When we say evidence, we are literally just saying, if you're teaching debate, right, you know what it looks like. We're not asking you to write complex or rubrics. We're like literally laundry list all of the qualities of what it means to be good as a debate communicator, right? So for you all, as you're saying, here's a skill I've picked. And you just think about all of the young people that you have felt in your class that have really nailed that before, right? So you may never have unpacked it that way. Maybe you wrote a rubric at like some conference and you're like, it's so abstract. Is if you literally just write a laundry list of them, when the kids win at this skill in my class, this is what I see. It's gotta be visual, like this is what they look like, this is what they talk like, this is what they see, this is what their homework look like. And you literally just write it in a laundry list. And then you can stick it on a sheet of paper that says strength and growth, which is when you've nailed this multiple times, I give it to you as a strength, which means you now have that. If you are not doing it well, I'm going to give it to a growth, means to kind of work on it. So when we say evidence, all we literally mean is that what does it look like to be good at this in my classroom? So I think where people lose out, which is where one of the things I do love about MHA being only contextual is often people, when they design formal assessment, like assessment companies, they have taken this really super practical thing and they've really essentialized it so far out to basically make it and rendered it meaningless. Then you as a teacher are struggling to unpack that, figure out what does a rubric look like underneath that. Because MHA is 100% about you unpacking your own story and your own curriculum, that you are not required to use some kind of abstract. It could just be like, good debate is when at least 50% of the class is convinced of your arguments. And we judge that by people raising their hand. That is literally evidence. Like, you don't have to make it more complicated. You are not trying to essentialize it. Now you can unpack it in a rubric if you want, but we've actually found that the best assessors and the best people who are doing performance and continuous improvement and formative development literally just have a strength growth list. So what you're doing is you're giving a young person saying, here's what the skill is, and here is what it's going to look like to do it well. I mean, imagine if you just walked in every class and you got that, right? You could self-calibrate, you understand it, and you know what it looks like. And you can also defend yourself. So it's like, hey, you said this is what it looked like to do well. I did this, and Jimmy saw me do that. And then it's like, oh, okay, you did do that. So I don't want you to overthink evidence. Is literally just like write down what it looks like to be well at it, and then stop. Don't make it fancier language. Young people can't understand it, and then it makes it useless.
Okay. I imagine that can have a lot of insight for students as well, just trying to figure out what they're good at, right? Like if I'm in high school, I didn't really know what I might be good at or what my interests were. It's a very formative time or a very formative period in everyone's life. So have you experienced that at all, where a student may be like, oh, I didn't know I was good at graphic design, but I actually really liked it, or something, or critical thinking, or whatever the skill may have been?
Absolutely. And you'll notice in a lot of the MHA tools, we don't do self-assessing. We do a lot of self-reflecting, where it's like, this is what it looks like. So we do this one thing. It's really a fun tool. I will highlight it. It's called an awesome circle. And people are like, I am you just write in an adjective. I am creative because I am really good at finding 3 to 4 alternative ways of accomplishing something. And we often will find is that all the other kids will say, so who else is really good at that? And like a bunch of people raise their hand. I'm like, do you consider yourself a creative person? They were like, no. I was like, well, guess what? That's the definition of being creative. So now you are a creative person. So we actually just find that people are, got back to that very original vision statement, is that people are constantly picking up what they are good at. And so we have intentional tools and intentional practices, though, that ensure that you are internalizing that. But a lot of it is just making it simple. Like, oh, you guys made this sound so complicated. Like this competency is just like a normal thing. Yes, I do that every day when I go home. My mom always says I'm really good at that. And we're like, well, you're good at that then. Like, I don't know why people live in such a dark space of low self-esteem. Because we are all really, really good at a lot of stuff. So yes, having it transparent, having it written down. But lastly, it also validates things where like my mom always says I'm good at that, but I didn't think it counted. So because you wrote it on this sheet of paper, because it looks like a formal document, I actually feel like I might have this, right? And so, because often when young people apply for jobs, they look at a job description and they're like, I'm not qualified for that because only my sister tells, that's not valid. So imagine probably starting in middle school when you can really take it. If every single class of every single grade showed you what you were really good at, it'd be like impossible for you to have low self-esteem.
Right. I love all of it. I want to make sure we hit some of the other aspects of the reframe model. Can you maybe tell us about steps 4 and 5, kind of reinforcing students' expectations, assessing and using feedback? What does that actually look like when you've seen it done well?
Sure. So I'll tie the next 3 steps all together.
Sure.
So when you have your skills and you have your evidence, the first thing you want to do is you want to go back and make sure that the activities you are doing are legitimately delivering those. So we often find that people will cut back on the amount of curriculum they have in activities because a lot of the stuff is just like excessive and not necessarily fun, or it was teaching a different skill. So you just want to make sure the activities that you design for your session that are really just like, this activity will build this evidence to hit that skill. So that's kind of the planning phase. What we find is that people will just jump in and not make it transparent. So now you have your skills, you have your evidence, you have the activities. You want to reinforce all this with your young people. So you want to like literally hand out the documents, hand out the strategies. What we love about reinforcing it is doing pop-up activities. So let's say, again, we're doing debate and we're defending kind of a topic. You might want to do like a little debate workshop where it's just like one class or even like 20 minutes of a class where you're saying, hey, everybody's going to be given a topic. And you're like, hey, see, when he did that, that's a skill we're looking for. So you just want to bring it alive someplace. Okay. So we say reinforcing expectations. We're not saying read your syllabus like 40 times. We're saying, let me show you what those expectations look like. Let me model them for you. You as a teacher could model it for you. You could actually bring a couple of young people saying, hey, we're starting this unit. I want the 3 of you to help me model this. But it's literally seeing what it looks like. If you want to bring in models from, it could be like videos that you want to bring in, but showing them so they kind of have a sense of what that is, unpacking it, knowing the guiding star. And then when you're implementing an activity, all you are doing, because it's transparent, is you are giving feedback on that. So if I know what we're doing, I know what the skill looked like, I know what it was supposed to look like, I can be like, hey, so when you did this today, did your partner think it sounded convincing? No, right? So assessing someone's hard is coming out of left field. But if you are all aware of it, young people can actually defend it. Like today we were all supposed to write a demonstrative sentence around our topic. It was supposed to look like this. How's everybody doing? How many of you feel like you have that? We're going to pair and share. So it allows you to do much more real-time feedback because you can say, here's what it was supposed to look like. Here's where you're at. That's why I don't recommend doing evidence as an abstract rubric. So it's like, here's what it was supposed to look like today. I did it. Great. You got a strength. Let's do it again. Another strength. So it's that feedback. And we have a lot of tools around feedback, but it's always like yesterday when we were doing this is what I expected. And here's how you did. So summative assessments, which are super abstract, do not give that kind of competence. So competency-based education is literally 100% grounded in competency-based building activities and the feedback to narrate how well you are doing on that competency. So it's much more like work, like performance management. Like, here's what I expected. Here's how you're doing. Do it again. Here's how you're expected. Here's how you're doing it again. And the last 2 phases, we can raise a separate question, kind of fall under a deeper kind of heart practice. So I would just say like a lot of this really, if you have all I would say like, if you go to any project-based learning training, if you're wondering if you're like, oh my God, I really just do direct instruction, I'm totally freaked out. Competency-based learning, modeling, and structures and graduate release will take you 90% of the way to actually teach differently. If you've never built an activity and you're really just doing direct instruction. So we try to, I don't want to get overly complicated. So project-based learning is kind of the activity basis. And then these are the things that sit over project-based learning that make the skills transparent.
Gotcha. Can I ask a question about one of the things I read and kind of into some of the materials was this kind of, and you mentioned it briefly, this kind of like gradual transfer of responsibility. So maybe if you're new to the competency, you see someone kind of modeling it first, and then you kind of try to practice that, and then you get some feedback. And that's pretty much the approach all throughout, right? Like kind of gradually scaffolding a young person's experience or their skills. And you find that that's really most effective when kind of taking this approach of kind of continuous interaction and feedback so that the person knows if they're on the right track or not. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to do, because we're all focused a lot, I mean, your organization is focused on work readiness. Mm-hmm. So if any of you know gradual release, it's often used as a day. Our kind of philosophy is I model it for you, then I practice it with you and we do it together. You practicing it on your own. I'm giving you feedback until you can do it independently. Work readiness is literally employers wanting you to do skills independently and not bugging them all the time. So like whatever skill you are doing, if you want them to be work ready at that skill, that means they can do that skill independently. That's why work readiness really isn't like an abstract concept. It is literally, so this idea is that project-based learning often can be applied with those methods. So in your project design or your activity design, right? So you reinforce expectations was about modeling, but it's about practice towards independence. So if you're doing competency-based learning and you want to get people to an outcome, we recommend that gradual release. We also like to make up terminology. Gradual release is you can Google it, it's everywhere, it's very straightforward. Some of them make it overly complicated, we don't. We have tools on it. But it really is just like, I watch you, you watch me, then I can do it independently, and then I'm calibrating. So when employers say there's a skills gap, a lot of it is that young people are like, hey, can you show me this? Can you do a little bit more? So that idea of independence, because then the last leg that young people do is just adopting to the way a company does it. So for a young person to say, hey, I'm a really good problem solver, and it's like, here are the 5 projects I did where I had involved a lot of problem solving, and I'm just like, can do it, pretty effortlessly. That's all an employer wants to hear.
Okay.
So I think, but I was wanting to say like project-based learning, huge industry, graduate release, tons and tons of research, and then adding a little reframe on top of it. But we're not trying to introduce things that you can't find.
Gotcha. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm gonna let people come off mute if they have a question they want to ask. But maybe while I'm doing that, can you just kind of, in your own words, let us know what that last step is? That explore the meaning making.
Exactly.
What does that mean, and why does it come last?
Sure. So I'm going to highlight the last 2. So one, we give feedback, and we've gone through that process. That's not abstract. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Is that we found that feedback works best when it's totally neutral, right? But often what we do is that, when you do well, the feedback is really emotional and it's very positive. And when you do something, not very well, you're kind of negative about it. Feedback is straightforward. But we found that because, especially working with young students of color and women and people who have come from oppressed populations, is that you're not taking it to the level of really believing it in your heart. So you've got to add the next layer of magnifying recognition. So like, you were good at this, I told you we're good, I still don't believe in it. I mean, I've been told I've been good at strategy for like 100 years, I still don't believe it, right? But like this specific practices, like I need to sit down, you need to internalize that you are really good at this. So we have a lot of but this idea is that don't assume that because a young person is good at it, they've internalized it. So then when I feel really good at something, meaning making is pushing young people to apply what their strengths are to something else in their life. So it's not another example in your content area. So I'm going to go back to the example we used, because this happened with our programs, in a debate class. So the skills of debate, like structuring an argument, defending your argument, we actually found that young people who are basically coming out as LGBTQIA students were having troubles really articulating and taking their stand at having and structuring that conversation. We actually found that the structure of debate conversation was actually a way that they could structure talking about their own identity. So as an example, as it's taking a skill and pushing a young person to apply it to someplace else in their life. Now that was a very dramatic kind of identity-based thing, but it could be if you are teaching finding a theme in a piece of literature, that is the equivalent of writing a business plan and finding a theme when reading business documents.
Sure.
So it's not more examples, it's saying push young people to apply it to some other part of their life that adds meaning. So once again, when that skill is transparent, so this idea can also be like writing a resume, it can be college and career readiness. But that last step is you've got to push young people to apply it elsewhere or they don't understand that it's transferable. So all of these little steps, and we have like a little simple template. It's basically just a new way to write a lesson plan. Is just adding those last two. We found that most teachers who had been through traditional teaching programs had just really never been taught how to care about that. So that seems to be where teachers tend to have the most questions and start on. But it literally is just apply it someplace else.
Right. And just off the top of my head, I remember seeing it was some kind of national poll last year where it's like 40 or 50% of students are just bored in class. So I could see this also being just something that turns engagement up to 11, right? If they're able to, if they're just able to connect that much more with the material.
Absolutely. I mean, we recommend, the way I kind of teach is we do an activity at the beginning where I understand the individual interest or some goal or some aspiration. And I love that NAF is really putting aspirations as one of its top pieces. So I will actually know the personal goal or aspiration of every young person that I'm working with so that throughout the whole entire teaching time, I'm constantly contextualizing. And so they're like, oh, this is so stupid. Remember, it's totally going to help you become A, B, and C. So I tend to make that a huge part. I don't like to impose that on people because you have 150 students, it's hard.
Right.
But like you can literally put on your desk, like, here's my aspirations. When I'm walking around, I can remember. But yes, that is exactly the reason we do it.
Great. I want to open it up for some audience questions. Does anyone have a question or a comment that you would like Leslie to address or just know about maybe your own experience? Like I said, I unmuted everyone, so you're capable of coming off mute if you would like to ask your question directly, or you can type it in the chat. Let's give everyone a second to do that if they would like to. If not, I'll throw another question your way, Leslie.
And I actually see somebody that I know who joined us as a guest. Kira?
Oh, welcome.
Dee, absolutely. In your comment, it's such a joy as a teacher to be able to find joy in recognizing people. Just to reference the Supreme Court thing again. When Cory Booker was like, you are worthy. It was just like this dramatic moment where the whole world just kind of stood still. But just how powerful that is to really name that. And it feels, young people often say it the most, like we actually have a little card called an amazing card. It's like a super easy tool to start this. Young people literally carry them around their wallets. I have had young people pull out a little amazing card. It just says you are because out of their wallet and say, I look at this when I'm down. So do not underestimate the power of that. Yes, affirmation is absolutely so powerful. We actually have a little guide on how to give affirmations. So if those of you are like, what's the affirmation look like? It's actually on our website. Oh, Brooke asked about our hireability framework. Should I jump onto that question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So Brooke, thanks for sharing that. So MHA offers kind of two frameworks. So one is our building block frameworks, which is 35 skills for, college, career, and life. And then we have what's called a hireability framework. And Brooke and I would joke, it's basically more like a fireability framework. And it sits in complement for entry-level employment and entry-level internships. So what we did is over a span of almost 8 years, we had 7 different survey instruments where we had 12,000 employers give a performance review of their young person. So I just want to say this is not a generic survey. This is an employer rating the performance of their intern after 6 weeks on their thing. So then when we looked at all that data, we tested about over 100 skills that we found there is a set of 12 very non-complex skills, showing up on time, having good attitude, that make up what's called a hireability framework. So if you have those, an employer will say that they would hire you 100% of the time. So if you possess those, it literally is something like offers help when you have nothing left to do, tries to solve a problem on their own. So it's it's available in the Google Drive I shared with you. What we found was that these 12 skills make up like the core. If you're a teacher, you will also think these 12 higher ability skills are basically classroom management behavior. Is that when employers say young people are not work ready, what we found is that they needed a subset of things that work together, which is I have a positive attitude, I show up on time, I am really helpful. And so that when those combine together, that an employer will automatically consider you work ready. And I want to point out that we tested multiple times, because we always harp on young people's communication, that if you have these 12 skills, we cannot make communication meaningful in the data. And we hired a top level researcher. We spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, just basically state the obvious. If you are skilled, your communication style becomes irrelevant. Like measuring skills, we measured it in multiple ways. When you don't have skills, they are attributing your low skill culturally to the way you communicate. So one of the ways to eliminate and underscore communication abilities as forms of discrimination in interviews is that when you have these skills. So work-based learning becomes the singularly most powerful tool, because if you have a 6-week internship, a young person can actually demonstrate those 12 skills, and those 12 skills will overcome a lot of the discrimination in the hiring practice, which is why most jobs used to have a 6-week probation period. So these skills are just become very, very powerful in complement to more advanced other kinds of contextualized skills. Brooke, does that help answer it? You can come off mute too if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I didn't want to manipulate and monopolize the conversation, because, you know, I love the work that you guys have done, and we've based a lot of our NAF new set of skills around the MHA framework. And so I think it's just incredibly powerful to hear you talk about it, and to share that with our audience. So thanks, Leslie.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said to everyone, our framework is universally adopted. It's available online. It can be used by anybody, anywhere. Most people have found it preferable because we built it with so many different people in mind. We even hired a cultural anthropologist to actually go through the entire development of the framework to make sure it was not culturally triggering and that it was actually objective. We hired people who specialize in designing observed assessments. I mean, we spent a lot of time. So if you are struggling to figure out, and thanks to NAF, you'll be able to get all that great resources through them, which is what I'm super excited about. So I'm glad to see that that tool is going to be useful for you all.
Well, thanks to you for making them available. We are only too happy, I'm sure, to adopt it, right, Brooke?
Yeah. I mean, this is the upside. People joke around, like people are anti-government, but you're like, when the government creates stuff, though, it's free. So it's like, because we were never a private organization, we spun out as a nonprofit just to continue the work. But we didn't start as like some business school social enterprise. So like we never had that pressure of it has to be able to be sold. It has to be able to be complicated. So a lot of our stuff, to be honest, is simple to use. Because if you want to make money selling services, you need to make stuff more complicated. So all of our partners can just run with our work because it was never meant to be overly complicated. Which is why I'm so excited you all could just quickly integrate it and adopt it.
Gotcha. Does anyone else have a question for Leslie or a comment or anything you want to do while we still have a couple minutes here? If not, I'm sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi.
I'm just so invigorated by your energy and also the work that you're doing. I was wondering about prepping teachers and how we support teachers in adopting the framework when they've had some kind of experiential episode to hang it on to. Like, do they put themselves in the position of a student where someone is modeling expectations, is having a chance to support them by co-creating or whatever, and getting feedback? Do they have that kind of experience, or do they always come at this this framework from a teacher point of view? Do they ever become the learner?
So usually when we do in-person training, we'll actually put the teacher, I mean, most of our in-person training is not, we don't do pass-through training. So we actually make sure that the teacher or the person is actually going through that experience. Now, COVID actually obviously impacted that. But I definitely recommend, I mean, I think in general, young people really respond to even with employers, right? When you feel like you're going through it together. So I think bringing that humility, I think of the challenges when teachers who want to, I mean, to be honest, if you are in a command and control classroom, MHA doesn't resonate with people because like youth power, I mean, a lot of our stuff just turns off people who are like command and control. So what we really recommend is people do this in joint partnership with their students, right? Because you're not changing your activity. It's saying, hey, like we actually recommend even you could go to students who've taken your class before and say, here's this framework. Which skills on here do you think you actually got out of here? Because I'm not really sure about it. And then you could teach it again and say, hey, what skills do you think are most important? So, because you're not looking to teach like 40 skills, right? You're saying, so I think this idea of in a classroom, say I could go two ways as a teacher. I could teach through this lens, so you're going to really build this skill, or I could teach through this lens to go through this skill. So like if you want to learn more collaboration, I could do more teams. If you want to do more, so a lot of this is an iterative process. So I think that's really the skill set you have to have as a teacher is iteration and be willing to adjust some of the timelines with which you accomplish your goals. Now I know there's barriers to time and testing and assessment. So I know it's not super easy. So, but I will say most of our teachers don't have a lot of experience with this. And if they don't overthink it, if they literally just do what we said, pick a skill, write some evidence down, give some feedback on it and celebrate it. The people who actually have the hardest time with our work are people who tend to overthink what I'm actually just saying because they're always used to told things are more complicated. So that would be my gift to teachers is literally just practice it, but do not overthink it. Do not think it's actually supposed to be harder. If it's easy, be like, oh my God, was it supposed to be harder? No. I don't think I totally answered your definition, but we have had many teachers have never gone through training and have adopted it. Like most of the people who've actually adopted our work have never been to a training. You haven't seen our tools yet. They are like really cute. They have little pictures. Yeah. They have fill in the blanks. I mean, it's like really like, if I could show you little pictures, I mean, our two core cards are like business size cards that have 2 words on them. And we have a whole guide. We have lots of directions. So our MHA is actually really easy compared to other tools.
There are links to Leslie's materials in that Google Drive link that I shared in the chat. That hour kind of flew by, actually. I want to be respectful. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Just really quick, on our MHA's website, mhalabs.org, also has a ton of tools. So I didn't put every single tool into your Google Drive. We also just paid a social justice illustrator. So if you are working with students of color, we actually just hired a social justice Black illustrator from LA to redesign all of our building block posters with beautiful, gorgeous pictures and illustrations. So I will, by the next 48 hours, I will pull all of those and put them into that Google Drive as well. They are really done through the lens of identity development, and they have all representation across all different races and LGBT, non-binary, all of it. That's passionate me.
Wonderful. I love seeing it. Leslie, how can people keep up on what MHA Labs is doing, sure, what you're doing, or if they want to hear more, perhaps on another research and tech talk, what can we do, to make that happen?
Absolutely. So our website is existing now. It has not been updated for a long time. We update the tool section, but we will be putting all the reframe on our website. But in the meantime, that's why I built you a whole reframe Google Drive so that you have all those tools. I don't want you to wait. And then we don't do a lot of social media, but what I would offer to you all is, I really love as an organization, the shared values. I mean, I just really, we don't do this for everybody. That I am happy to come back and do custom sessions, custom trainings. So we don't offer any more kind of broad scale because we're very contextual, but I'm happy if you all want to come together and be like, we'd love to go deeper on this. MHA is free, we're a free resource. So I'm happy to come on. If you as an individual want individual coaching, that's actually my favorite. I'm happy to do one-on-one sessions that can all be coordinated through Nick or other members of the team. But if you want to do this work and you want to help young people truly realize their full potential, it sounds generic, but it's true. I want to be here to help you.
Thank you. Very generous. With that, I'm going to officially kind of wrap it up. I'll stop recording here in just a second. But Leslie, maybe you and I can just hang out for 10 minutes Absolutely. Or so in case anyone had a question that we didn't unfortunately get to on the talk. But please keep your eyes out for our next research and tech talk. We're going to be having some folks on from the Education Development Center, EDC, specifically Dr. Catherine Shields and Claire Waterman, about a new work-based learning kind of tool toolkit they have developed that's specifically geared for educators and district personnel. So keep an eye on your email for more information on that. With that, I'm going to shut off the recording, but if anyone wants to come off mute and kind of ask Leslie a question, we'll
if you have
be
ideas and suggestions, I am not going anywhere, so I love chatting versus talking. I know I sound like I talk a lot, but I prefer chatting.
Well, thank you.